Next up, we have another public servant, Arun Kumar. Arun's title is very long, so we'll find out from him in a minute what he really does. He's Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Global Markets and Director General of the US and Foreign Commercial Service. But many of us here in Silicon Valley have known Arun for many, many years. He was at KPMG and has been very big in TiE and supporter of TiE as well. Also, some of you may not know he's a poet, and we're going to find out a little bit about that side of Arun now. So please welcome Arun Kumar. Please have a seat. So Arun, I think one of the things we've been discussing in the past couple of weeks is Indian income. Indian American income now is at the highest. $100,000 a year is the average income. We have more college degrees than most other ethnic minorities and ethnic groups. And all these stats add up, right? And people are calling Indian Americans the model minority. But rather, the discussion now is we shouldn't be the model minority, but we should be the model. And with that comes responsibility of giving back, doing public service, doing philanthropy. So tell me about your reasoning behind why you got to public service.
Well, first of all, it's great to be here. Great to be here with friends. You know, when you start talking about income, you get into very dangerous territory because my wife is always reminding me of my current level of income in public service. But seriously, why did I get interested in public service? You know, I can trace the motivations to a very young age, because when I was growing up, my father was talking to me about service, about the importance of giving back. In fact, he would quote the chapter of Luke in the Bible, which says, "To whom much is given, much is expected," which is what Preet actually talked about when he was in his comments. So it was laid a long time ago. And when I was coming towards retirement from my previous firm in KPMG, I began thinking about what I should do next. And then various developments occurred that pulled me into the realm of public service.
That's great. So how was this journey going from Silicon Valley to Washington? What was that like?
You know, interestingly enough, I'd begun to get interested in public policy when I was here in Silicon Valley. Some years ago, maybe 10 years ago, Ramesh Yadav and I, with the encouragement of Raj Jaswal, we started the TiE Economic Forum. And to this entrepreneurial community, we introduced various ministers, political leaders from various countries, economists, think about issues that were broader than just pure entrepreneurship. Then later I got involved with the US India Business Council, where I served on their board of directors. And that got me quite involved in trade policy. So all of that had kind of laid some kind of interest in public policy. My youngest son lives in Washington. I would visit him often. And then a friend of mine in Washington said, you know, you should really consider public service. Turned out that I got invited to a couple of White House events at which the head of the White House personnel office was present. And he said, well, you know, you should really consider public service. And then quickly he put in front of me 3 very interesting opportunities, of which, you know, I picked the one that I eventually got selected for. So that was a journey of going from here to Washington.
So the job you picked, was that the highest paying of the 3 jobs?
Actually, it was not. But the difference is very little.
So what is the differences between Silicon Valley and Washington? I tend to go there once a month, and it's such a different environment and culture. So
You know, I should start with what's common. Because there is in Washington a tremendous intensity, certainly with the people I work with, to make a difference, to change the world. Use Silicon Valley terms, to make a dent in the universe. You wouldn't want a government to make a dent, but certainly you want to make a difference. And that's a very deep motivation among all the people I work with. There's a lot of commonality there. I would say that in Silicon Valley, we often talk of scale. How can we do things that can be scaled up? Well, the government is the ultimate place for scale. So public service, I think one of the great satisfactions of public service is that you can do things at scale, things that affect your country, things that can affect your relationship with another country, things that can affect thousands of companies, tens of thousands of jobs can be created. So I think of all of those things as commonalities with Silicon Valley. In terms of differences, though, you know, again, Preet touched on this. The government does move very slowly. I mean, very, very slowly. So many of the mechanisms and processes that are set up to prevent you from doing the wrong thing, actually prevent you from doing the right thing. So let's say I found somebody who's just the perfect person to do a certain job. Now, it would take me 6 months to get that person in, but there's no guarantee you would get him. That the process might end up getting somebody else. So it's very complex and very slow. That's a difficult part, but I'd say the motivations are generally extremely good. And I'm proud to be working with the people I work with. I just have an amazing team of people who are very talented, very dedicated, very mission-oriented around the world.
That's fantastic. I mean, some of the other differences I know is I was forced to wear a jacket today, and both you and Preet wear ties and suits. So I think
But that's a good point. There is a bit of formality to the government process. For example, one of the things I do quite a lot is participate in bilateral meetings. It's a term that you don't use in industry. Bilateral meeting is one government meeting with another government. It's all set, how many people can meet. On each side, you have roughly the same number, the same level, and there's a certain formality to it, certain hierarchy to the process of government. Those are the ways in which I'd say it's different from Silicon Valley.
so. I'm still puzzled with your title. That's the other thing with governments. You tend to have long titles. So you're Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Global Markets and Director General of the U.S. and Foreign Commercial Service. What do you really do?
So, first of all, about the title, I don't know if you about the title first. I was told when I went to Washington that it's the longest title in the US government. So I called my wife, Poonma, and said, Poonma, I have the longest title in the US government. She said, what about that? You've got to understand that it's the shorter titles that are more important, like Secretary of Commerce or President. So, but what does this mean? What this means is that I lead an organization of about 1,700 people in 70 plus countries and 108 offices across the United States, all focused on doing three things. One is increase US exports. Two, increase foreign direct investment into the US. And three, open markets for US companies. And all of these are done with the purpose of creating high quality jobs in the United States. And that, I think, is a very uplifting mission because these jobs are generally higher income than average. And income and self-esteem that comes from good jobs is extraordinarily meaningful. And I feel that all of us feel very privileged to be doing work that's fun and also creates meaningful impact.
So this audience is full of entrepreneurs. So what does the Commerce Department do to help entrepreneurship and entrepreneurs?
So we have a number of programs. First of all, the United States government is very focused on promoting entrepreneurship and innovation, not just in the US, but around the world. The president has a program called Presidential Ambassadors for Global Entrepreneurship, PAGE program, which Commerce supports. A certain number of highly accomplished US entrepreneurs are selected to kind of evangelize entrepreneurship around the world. In the Commerce Department, right here in my own department, are US Export Assistance Centers, and we have one in San Jose, one in Oakland, one in San Francisco. They are all ready and willing and eager to engage with entrepreneurs from a very early stage. In our view, you should think about overseas markets around the same time you think about US markets, about local market. And they're helpful in creating market strategies, finding partners or distributors, finding buyers in other countries. So I would encourage all the entrepreneurs in this room, if you haven't connected with the US Export Assistance Center, please do so. And in fact, my colleague, Chris Dam, from our center in Silicon Valley is right here today. So please make it a point. If you're interested in exports, please connect with the USIAC.
So I know you had the privilege of going with President Obama and Secretary Pritzker to India for the visit in January. So can you tell us a little bit about this US-India relationship as it pertains to commerce and how things are there?
Well, over the last year since the Prime Minister, the new Prime Minister took over, there's been a sea change in the relationship, particularly in the economic and commercial relationship. One of the high points of the President's visit to Delhi was the announcement of an elevated dialogue between the two countries. So we used to have what was called a strategic dialogue between the US and India that occurred every year, which addressed various issues of security and other strategic issues. But we changed, at the President's visit, it was elevated to be a strategic and commercial dialogue, which means that commerce and business will be at the center of the relationship. The US has a similar two principal dialogue only with one other country, and that's China, with whom we have a strategic and economic dialogue. So the very fact that the strategic and commercial dialogue was set up is a strong signal of the elevation of the ties and of the centrality of commerce and business to those ties. As a part, a number of programs have been launched. The United States is taking a lead on the development of 3 smart cities in India. We are closely involved in advancing participation of the US in the infrastructure needs of the country. There's a slew of programs, and in Delhi alone, the ambassador is leading about 70 different work streams of work to advance the US-India relationship.
Indian American is now the U.S. ambassador to India.
Yes, and we have a great ambassador in Richi Verma.
Great. So one of the final questions I want to ask you is, it's hard to imagine a guy, a business guy, and now a public servant getting into poetry. So how did you start writing poems? How did you get interested in it?
I've been writing for actually quite a long time. It's only about 5 years ago that I published it, mainly because my friend Abraham Verghese, the author, said, well, these should be published. But why do I write? And this question, and how does that impact my work? Interesting enough, at one of the congressional hearings, a congressman asked me this question. But I find that poetry is very complementary to the work I do and the work I used to do before. In some sense, when you think about poetry, what it does is it tries to find the core of a situation. It tries to find the simplicity that's at the center of a complex world. It tries to find the organism mechanism that kind of lets you work your way through complexity. I find it to be extremely complementary, and find you have to do it in a very concise and disciplined way. So I find it a very natural complement. And by the way, Arun said, poetry makes nothing happen. My view is that's not true. Look at Martin Luther King. I have a dream speech. When that's pure poetry.
So on that note, I want to just bring up a slide, please. You could bring up the slide.
Sure. So Emma wanted me to read out a poem.
So this is the book that Arun has written called Plain Truth. And if we could go to the next slide, we'd like to conclude with Arun reciting one of his poems.
Okay. So I picked a poem that has some technology in it, quite simple technology, but also something that applies to people who will be flying home from here, called Believing in Banoli. I think of you, Mazia Banoli, every time I look out of the airplane window and see the wing tilt bravely into the air. I think of my faith that your physics will not fail, that the flow of air over that wing will every time create low pressure, a rush, an undertow of air to bear us aloft. And of you, Isaac Newton, your third law of motion. When I see below, clouds and continents traversed as the jets thrust back, I feel safe enough to close my eyes and know your laws will work every time.
Thank you, Arun.
Thank you so much.